Somewhere around the second year of our country dealing with the current pandemic, I had a mental health relapse. Up until then, while I had been formally diagnosed, I was actually doing quite well. My family had come to terms and had rallied around me, which I know is a privilege not everyone gets to enjoy. I had a small handful of friends that were extremely loyal and supportive, who were doing their best to educate themselves on my condition. Yeah, I had a great support system. I had run the gamut of options they tell you to try. You know, yoga, meditation, prayer groups, religious counseling, all of that. I had already pretty much nailed down a system that worked. I was on the prescribed medication, I was taking it at the right time, in the right amounts. I was doing all the worksheets my therapist was giving me. Thanks to a local NGO, I could afford access to the healthcare that I needed. It was supposed to be good, but I had a relapse, and the long and short of it is, I tried to take my own life. I did it by eating a lot of stuff that you should not eat in large quantities, and definitely not together at the same time. The main side effect of that kicked in after I did what I did was kind of a stupor. I was falling asleep on my feet almost. Everything I remember in the blurriest of ways. Mostly the physical sensations, strong enough to leave a lasting imprint on my memory. I remember somebody's hands forcing me to kneel down over a bucket, somebody's fingers down my throat, forcing me to throw up. I remember being dragged into a car to go to the hospital. I remember being half shoved into a wheelchair and whisked away when I reached the hospital. Everything was just this confusion of voices that felt like they were yelling and lights that were just too bright. I felt like everyone was staring at me, like something shameful had just been revealed. I felt very exposed, and I was taken away from my family. It was probably some kind of waiting room because I remember that paranoid feeling of people around me staring at me. I remember being on something that was exceedingly cold. And when I went into shock and started having a panic attack because nobody would tell me what was happening, what was going on, where my family was, or why I couldn't see them, I remembered a nurse or an orderly saying, "Great, just what we need, a panic attack on top of everything else." And then I was manhandled onto a cold surface, which I later found out was them giving me an x ray. And then that was it. I lost consciousness, and when I finally came around, I was still really groggy. The overwhelming urge was to just go to sleep. But I had no idea where I was, what time it was, what day it was, where my family were, and before I could even begin to kind of take stock of my surroundings, a couple of doctors descended with clipboards, and it almost felt like an interrogation. I know they were just trying to determine from me what I had taken, how I had gotten hold of it, and stuff like that. Which, I mean, it wasn't exactly comforting, but it wasn't triggering either. It was just a lot of extra confusion from me. The real fear actually kicked in when my regular doctor showed up. So, this is the doctor who is familiar with my case, who sees me often. And I thought of this person, this doctor, as a person who's someone on my side, so to speak. But next thing I knew, they opened their mouths and the term medico legal, I believe, was used. Essentially, what I couldn't make sense of was that my doctor, one of the key figures of my support system, who had seen how rough the journey I had taken had been, was now suddenly threatening to call the cops on me because I had committed a crime. I was looking at potential jail time, and by all accounts, the hospital should have already called the cops, but had stayed their hand. The moment of actually trying to actually commit suicide, it didn't feel like I was the one doing those things. I felt like I was in the passenger seat, distant from what my hands were doing, what my body was doing. Like I was watching someone else move me. But this was a whole different kind of fear. This was I cannot. There are no words to explain the agony and the fear that comes over you when you wake up from something that in itself is already so awful that you are in shock, and not to mention heavily sedated, to be threatened like that with a law that you know nothing about. Honestly, before we can say that this is the year Malaysia finally, improves its healthcare system, or this is the year a bigger budget is allocated towards mental health stuff. The main thing is that suicide should be decriminalized in this country. It's not right. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. The fear that I felt in that moment, the panic, the paranoia that followed after that for every second until they let me out of the hospital. God, it's just so awful. And no one deserves that, especially not when they're at their most vulnerable and in so much pain.